Welcome, everybody. I think the last should close the door. My name is Nico Pisanidis. I'm from Greece, major IT. So I'm working in the branch of technology the last 2 years, and I will moderate this session. As you already know, that we have aviation, new cyber threats in aviation. So there's been safety. When we're talking about that, we are talking about what is on the air. So we have the traditional traffic air control and radars, but also we have UAVs, and they pose new threats. And at the end, we'll have surprise demo. So let me introduce our panel from left to right. We have Dr. Vincent Lenders. He's a research program manager in ARMA Swiss. He's the industrial director of Zurich Information Security, co-founder of Open Sky Network Association. Welcome, Vincent. We have Ms. Kim Hartmann, that she's been employed in the Institution of Electronics, Signal Processing and Communication at Otto von Zurich, Germany. And he's been registered as Horizon 2020 project expert. And last but not least, we have our gentleman from Raytheon, our sponsor. We have Mr. Jeffrey Little, that he's the head of business development and strategy for Raytheon Government Cyber. And also we have Mr. Scott Linner, that he's leading the cyber engineer at Raytheon's cyber operation, development and evaluation code, that is responsible for testing, training and hardening Raytheon systems and their customers. So as you probably know or you don't, they're rolling out new protocols in aviation. Maybe you have heard about this European Union scissors or next generation in the United States. But these protocols are shift security, and we'd like to know what these threats are coming. So we'd like to know the new threat model that is rolling out there. So what are the capabilities of the attackers? So I hope Vincent can give us some answers to that. Okay, welcome.
Thank you for this introduction. I'm going to present about the impact of aviation security on cyber power. This is joint work with colleagues from the University of Oxford in UK, which are also sitting here, and the Technical University of Kaiserslautern in Germany. Aviation security has raised quite some debate and media attention in the last few years. And I assume that you have also heard about some of the security problems that are present in air traffic control. And what is interesting here is that there is actually a debate because there has been some security researchers and hackers which have said that there are some problems, security problems in the newest air traffic control protocols. But on the other side, then they have these authorities which have a deeper understanding of the aviation processes in contrast to the hackers, but are not fully aligned or not fully agree with what the security hackers have actually are claiming, that it's possible to hijack planes or to let planes crash. So my goal in this presentation is to bridge this gap and provide more insights. And for this, actually, we have been doing quite a lot of research in the last few years. So we have been working on this topic for 5 years now. And on the technical level, analyzing vulnerabilities and protocol security. But also, we've been discussing with air traffic controllers, pilots, with many of those, and military agencies, and asked about their opinion. And also conducted surveys to get a larger and more representative view of the threat. So my presentation will be structured as follows. I will start with an introduction of air traffic control, how it is today, but also how it will evolve in the future. And then I will talk about security problems, also about the new aviation threat model that we developed in this work, and also on the impact it has, the security problems on cyber power. And before concluding, I will explain the reasons where we are standing now, where we are at. So when we look at air traffic control today, this is basically if you fly an aircraft today, the aircraft is tracked mainly by two technologies today, by primary radar and secondary radar. On the right side, you see here primary radar. This works by sending out a beam of energy towards the aircraft, and then this energy is reflected by the aircraft, and the radar on the ground can determine the distance and also the direction where the aircraft is. This is uncooperative surveillance technology because it doesn't require the cooperation from the aircraft. On the left side of the picture, we see secondary radar. This is a cooperative technology. So on the aircraft, there is a transponder, and the ground station will interrogate the transponder, and the transponder has to answer. Typically today, I mean, these two technologies are still widely deployed, and if you look at how air traffic control is implemented, it's often a combination of these two technologies to get a recognized air picture, which fuses the information from both types of information sources. The secondary radar is more accurate, so it's preferred for civilian purposes. It gives also more meta-information. On the other side, the primary radar is more interesting for military purposes because it's uncooperative, so it allows to track aircraft even if they shut off the transponder. So in the future, there's a vision of a next-generation air traffic control system. And the main component of this vision is ADSB, which stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. So the idea is to change the way our aircraft are localized. The idea is to have the aircraft determine themselves where they are located by using satellite-based navigation systems like GPS, and then to allow them to broadcast this information periodically to other aircraft in their neighborhood and also to ground stations on the ground. This should allow for better accuracy also, and also better situational awareness. So if we look at the roadmap, there are big or large programs in Europe, US, and also in other parts of the world to implement these technologies, the ADSB deployment, and also other technologies. In Europe, it's by Eurocontrol, it's the CESAR program, and in the US, it's by the FAA, it's the NextGen program. So the idea is that by 2020, so in 4 years, all aircraft that travel civil airspace should have such an ADSB out transponder and broadcast this information. Currently, we are in the deployment phase and the testing phase, and already more than 60% of the aircraft are already equipped with ADSB and send out this data. So ADSB brings many potential benefits. So here is a slide from Air Services Australia. Australia has been an early adopter of the ADSB technology because they have a lot of areas where there is not much population and not many airports, and they didn't have a radar coverage. So they were an early adopter, and they see the advantage as shown on this slide, that they can use ADSB will actually enable ATC non-radar environment. It will provide better situational awareness. It will enable collaborative decision making, also collision avoidance, and even replace radar. But maybe you realize that an important thing is missing actually on this slide. Actually, there is no mention about security. So security doesn't seem to be an advantage. So to highlight this further, let me show you how the security concept is envisioned in the next generation air traffic control system. Right, so I had to left this slide intentionally blank because there is no security concept. So if you look at the standards, there is no mention, no notion of security. There is a lot of notion of safety, but no security. If you look for security controls like encryption, cryptographic controls, authentication, there is none of these things. So you may ask, is this a problem? Because these guys are probably not stupid. So why is this so? Well, okay, that's a good question, and that's actually how the debate is on, because some people argue that actually it's a problem, the hackers, because all this data is transmitted over the air. Everybody can intercept and potentially also send, since it's a wireless broadcast channel. But, for example, in this official report from FAA in 2010, they write, using ADSP data does not subject an aircraft to any increased risk compared to the risk that is experienced today. So there is actually, in their point of view, actually the technology will not add any additional risk. But actually we argue in this work that is actually, it maybe have been in the past or at the design time of ADSP, but the threat model has changed today. And this is mainly caused by two developments. On the one hand, we have an increased reliance, as I showed you, on these unprotected wireless data links to exchange information. And these data links are increasingly used for automated decision making. So if you look out also at the traffic collision avoidance systems, in the future it's supposed to be using also ADSP for making decision about collision avoidance and changing flight path. So this is a change. And on the other side, on the threat model, we have also new developments, which is basically the widespread and easy access to new devices, software-defined radios that you can buy commercially off the shelf for a relatively low price. And also you have a lot of information available on the internet today, which maybe was not at the design time of ADSP, but currently you can download on the internet almost all information you want to know about the protocol, but not only the protocol description, you can also download open source software that allows you to actually receive avionics signals and also send avionics signals. So we observe a democratization, basically, of the attacker capabilities. So here I have a small demonstration, which I would like to show you to highlight the problem. Yes. So what is here shown in this demonstration is the air picture from a ground station, ADSP ground station in Switzerland. So at the beginning, we're just measuring the regular aircraft. And then, in a couple of seconds, an attack will be launched. And in this attack, actually, this is something an attack we implemented a couple of years ago for a security conference to provide more awareness of the problem. We use this device here, which is a software-defined radio that you can buy for roughly 1,000 euros. And we use this device to emulate the trajectory of 100 ghost aircraft. And we start the attack, and basically it creates random aircrafts at random places, all sent from obviously the same device, and creates quite a lot of chaos for the air traffic controller, which will be confused, like we see here. It appears suddenly all these aircraft which are referred to as chaos in this with a call sign. Basically, they appear and they're all sent from the single device. And this device is affordable, so it's a real threat. Another example, which goes more into the privacy issue, is that actually all the information is sent unencrypted. So there are now websites like Flight Radar 24 and many others that actually display a lot of information online in real time about all the aircraft that are flying around. And you can actually observe those. This is based on a crowdsourcing of sensors. So Flight Radar 24 operates sensors basically by sending sensors to people at their home, and then they plug an antenna on the roof of the house, and they collect this information, send it centrally, and then you can observe globally the whole air traffic. You can also, with this device here, it's a USB software-defined radio that costs 10 euro on eBay. You can also capture basically all these signals with a radius of 350 kilometers. So if I plug this here on my laptop, I could actually observe the whole air picture and get all this information. So in our perspective, this has a big impact on the cyber power, because now we have a much wider access the attackers have a much wider access to tools that enable them actually to perform active attacks. As I've shown, they can actually perform denial of service attacks and loss of situational awareness, but also passive attacks, because now with these cheap devices, everybody can actually listen to the channel and retrieve any information, because all this information is unencrypted. So in this perspective, it gives a shift of power away from nation states, because previously people that were able to capture avionics signals or to transmit avionics signals were mostly nation states, because it costs a lot of money, required dedicated hardware, but now it's democratized and it opens the door to many new threat agents. That's why the main contribution of this work is actually a categorization of the threat agents that can engage with the new avionic air traffic control systems. We categorize the threat agents according to 3 categories: the resources, the type, and the motivation of the threat agent. If you look at the standard or the classical electronic warfare model, so this would be the threat will be another nation or a military threat, which has almost unlimited resources, can be active, and the motivation is to perform warfare. But now we have all these additional threat agents that can engage and that have an impact on cyber power. The passive observer, this can be a person with very low budget. It doesn't need any equipment. It can just retrieve information like on Flight Radar 24, as I've shown before, for personal interest. Then we have script kiddies or hobbyists, which is a threat agent which has a little bit more resources. You can buy software-defined radios, as the ones I've shown here. And it can be also active. This device can send. And okay, the motivation would be here more recognition. But then we have also cyber criminals, which could try to exploit financial gains out of this business with a medium to high budget. And last but not least, a major threat is cyber terrorism, because this could be people, terrorist attacks, similar to what we have today with hijacking or or trying to have plane crashing, but attacking the system from a cyber perspective. So for political or regional religious purposes. So if we look at the different threat agents and the target systems in air traffic control, I mean, there are more, but these are the main ones. Like if we look at the classical threat model of a nation state, of course, it can engage in almost all technologies because it has enough resources. But when we look at the other threat models, the new ones, they can now engage also in ADSP, for example, in the newest air traffic control protocols. Also in secondary radar, because actually they built, secondary radar is built on the same data link as ADSP. So it inherits also the same vulnerabilities. And if we look at cyber terrorism, which could also potentially engage with traffic collision avoiding systems. I will show more an example in a couple of slides. So here are some examples to show the problem. The first example is about passive observer threat. And there we have actually, here on this picture, we show an FBI flight operation over the US that is actually visible on this site, adspexchange.com. And what's special about this, it's actually a mission, a surveillance mission over the US. And actually the FBI was performing this kind of missions for more than a decade, but actually the public had never noticed about it. And it came up recently in the media that this is a problem, but actually it was not possible to, I mean, nobody actually realized it. But now if you have these platforms like here, I mean, you can see in real time actually these flights being, where these flights are and what actually they do. So it changes completely the threat model. Also, a second example that goes along this line is an example from Switzerland about military drones that can be tracked with a smartphone app. So the flight radar has a smartphone app, and you can then watch in real time the aircraft, and the military drone that is doing some surveillance at the borders between Italy and Switzerland, it's actually being tracked, sending out ADS-B signals. So with this app, when the drone was doing surveillance missions to check if the refugees are coming from Italy, actually the refugees could actually also use this app to check where the drone is and just pass the border when the drone is not flying. And the third example is about cyber terrorism. Here is an example how this could be used. Attacks on ADS-B could be used to actually cause troubles with the traffic collision and avoidance system. Because the newest version, the newest evolution of TCAS plans actually to use ADS-B signals to be more efficient. And as I've shown, actually you can send fake signals from the ground with arbitrary content. So an attacker could actually, a terrorist could be on the ground, emulating an aircraft, a collision to a real aircraft. And this one thinks there is a collision, so he must apply some change in track. And then you could actually try to divert the track towards a real aircraft. So you could cause trouble or even potential collisions at the end. So this is a big problem. So, okay, you may ask, what are the reasons for this lack of security? And I mean, the game is not so easy because actually there are many reasons. We researched this and we found out there are many reasons which actually hinder the development of security controls in this next generation air traffic control. One reason is the long development and certification cycles. This is a big problem. So, because ADS-B, for example, it was designed more than 10 years ago, and by that time there was actually no software-defined radio on the market, so this threat was not existent. But basically, since the technology takes so much time, it's not even operational, but it takes so much time to get to this point, and it will be used and probably also for a couple of years or 10 to 20 years afterwards. The cycles are so long that it takes that it is actually hard to keep up with the new cyber threats, which evolve much more quickly, of course. Then there are some legacy and compatibility problems. I mean, the aviation operates in a global context, so you cannot come up with the proprietary solution. It must be interoperable over the whole world, so it's very difficult to agree and to find the common base for technologies. Also, cost pressures in the civil aviation over the last years. There has been huge cost pressures. The airlines must keep their prices low, and of course, they try also to keep the security investments to the least as possible, so to not cause overhead costs. Also, an issue we observed is the frequency overuse. Actually, the same frequency are used over and over, which cause also problems in terms of security. And actually, the aviation community is very in favor of open systems. Actually, they don't want to, I mean, by that time, they didn't want to have encryption because they want, of course, to have all this information available to avoid collision. The more information there is about situational awareness, the better. But this raises questions about not only about the aircraft, but also the privacy of who is traveling, as I showed before. For example, for the FBI flights, I mean, this is a concern for the privacy of the owner or of the aircraft. So what to do next? I'm coming to the end. So we see two things that needs to be done to address this issue. First is awareness. I'm saying awareness because I think we are not there yet. I mean, there has been quite a lot of media attention and papers about this problem, but we surveyed recently more than 200 professionals in the aviation domain. These were air traffic controllers and pilots, and asked them about what they think about the security of the system they're using. And actually, it was pretty surprising. Like 50% of them, they actually think that the systems are secured in some way. And if they're not, they think that the redundancy, there is so much redundancy in the instruments that they have that will not cause a big problem. But redundancy security cannot be solved with redundancy, because as an attacker, you can attack multiple systems at the same time. So this requires an awareness and a different way of thinking in this community, which is very oriented towards safety and not security, as we can see. And then on the research and development, there needs to be done things. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's clear that we cannot change the systems on the short term. I mean, this is the deployment is going on. This is not something that can be completely changed during the deployment. So we need short-term solutions to improve the security immediately, without any change in the protocols and the hardware. So how could it look like? For example, intrusion detection systems. This could be something that we have seen in computer networks, but this could be also an approach, a valid approach for avionic networks also. And in the long term, of course, I mean, it's inevitable that we will need to have some better protection of the data links that are being used, to have some confidentiality and integrity of the data links and at the protocol level. And also, what is certainly necessary to keep up with the cyber threat, which is changing so quickly, there's a need to speed up also the technology and certification cycles in the industry, in the aviation industry. So to conclude, I mean, I've shown that recent advancements in technology actually are changing the threat models in aviation, and this has an influence on cyber power. So, I mean, there are currently simple attacks which can be performed with limited resources, and this moves actually away the cyber power from classical nation states actors to other actors like criminals, terrorists, even hobbyists and passive observers. And we claim that awareness is necessary, and if we want to regain balance in cyber power, restore the original balance in cyber power, we need to develop new secure protocols also in this area. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Vincent. I hope they will not be afraid to fly back home and go home by other means. We have some minutes for questions. If someone from the audience. I would like to say also your affiliation.
Yes, Karlo, your National Cybersecurity Center, Finland. I'm just wondering, out of the blue, you considered all possible actors as threat actors. Could you actually turn to thinking of in a completely other way around and actually consider that crowdsourcing sensor deployment actually could be not a threat, but an opportunity for increased security, for that you actually increase the sensor base by crowdsourcing the sensor infrastructure?
Yes, I'm very thankful for this question, because actually we thought about it and we did already something about it, because we created actually a crowdsourcing sensor network which is called OpenSky Network, which actually has the goal actually to improve the security and the data access of air traffic control by using crowdsourcing mechanisms. So actually, the OpenSky network is a completely open system where everybody with this dongle or another sensor can participate and send the data to the network. And then we actually, in our research, we have been evaluating different techniques, intrusion detection techniques, anomaly detection techniques that could be actually deployed on such a sensor network. So I completely agree. This gives also some new opportunities for protection, which should be followed.
Thank you. Someone else? Please. Wait, Marcus, please. Yeah, okay.
Okay, takes the microphone. Okay. Markus Maybaum asking from a researcher perspective from Fraunhofer FKIE. Now you mentioned OpenSky, which is a very basically good idea, but doesn't it open at the same time opportunities for invaders for faking? You mentioned this ghost plane example. Now, of course, this gives the opportunity for someone else to participate in the OpenSky network to induce more fake information maybe, and so with this actually mess up your air picture, like keeping the ATC busy and busy with fake traffic, and maybe you can also sneak in an aircraft into an airspace by just keeping the ATC busy with fake signals.
Yes, I mean, if you send fake signals, of course, they will be intercepted by the sensor networks also. But I mean, what can certainly be done in a crowdsourcing approach is that you can check the integrity of different sensors which are co-located. I mean, the vision of open sky is actually that you have so many sensors around, that many sensors capture the same information at the same time. So you can cross-check the information that you receive from sensors at different places, and the density should be also so high that you could even apply techniques like multilateration. Then you would be able to verify, actually, you would have such a high density of sensors that you could even verify this ADSB, for example, information, which is not meant to be necessarily multilaterated, but you could do it, yes.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of questions. Yeah, I hope you'll not miss your coffee later. Don't blame me. So, but we have a gentleman here, yeah? Okay, in front. Just to keep the row.
So Bob Ducharme, I'm with a company called Ixia. Why do you think, if that device is so inexpensive, why hasn't a serious attack happened at a major airport yet?
Right, this is the question. I mean, the first is whether something has happened before or not. That's the first question. I'm not aware of any attack, but it doesn't mean it never happened, that people have tried to, maybe not necessarily attack on purpose, but maybe leaked some signals out that actually confused some of the air traffic control. But actually, as I showed, actually the future protocols like ADSB, they're not operational yet. So they will be operational in 2020. So that's why actually it's not, from a operational perspective, it's not allowed for an air traffic control to rely on ADSB data to make a safety relevant decision. I mean, sometimes they check also the ADSB data, but they can't make safety decisions. So that's why I would say probably today nothing happened, and probably until 2020 nothing will happen, because this information is not operationally used yet. But after 2020, the plan is to be operational, and then air traffic controllers can start basing their safety decisions, and also the pilots, on this information.
Okay, one more question, please. One more. I'm sorry.
Thank you for the nice presentation. You mainly focused on the ASDB protocol, but as far as I learned, there is another system which is used on the aircraft, which is called Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. I think it's also possible by using this system to inject malicious codes to the aircraft control system. And what do you think about this? And additionally, multimedia systems used in the airplanes are also is a threat factor for the aircraft system. What do you think about this issue? Thank you.
Right. So ACARS, this is true. I mean, there are some issues. There's been also quite some debate in the onboard systems where you could hack. There has been even a CyCon talk 3 years ago here in this room discussing this. So, I mean, this is true. I mean, we never looked at the onboard systems. But about ACARS, we looked at it. I mean, ACARS, there are different versions of ACARS, so it's a little bit more complicated. There are still the unencrypted versions, and there are also encrypted versions of ACARS. So then the game might change, but still there are a lot of unencrypted ACARS data being sent out. Whether you can hijack a plane or not, I cannot confirm this.
Okay, we're running out of time. Thank you, Vincent, for your presentation. This is Click and Grow. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we are going to right away to our next presentation about UAV and how this has to do with cyber power. And so I'm asking Kim to be on stage. The floor is yours. Both of them, they have a very enjoyable papers in our proceedings. So if you have more questions, you can read them. The book is not only to be a souvenir in your library. Just read it, please. So please, Kim.
Yes, so thank you all for being here. My name is Kim Hartmann. I'm from the Otto von Guericke University in Germany. I'm going to talk about UAV exploitation and especially how UAVs, in terms of civilian UAVs, may be used to actually present or demonstrate cyber power. So if there were 2 take-home messages that you should get from my talk, then that's probably going to be that one, civilian UAVs actually do impose a threat to cyberspace or to cyber power. And the other one is that there is more action needed from policymaking point of view and from the legislation. So bear those two things in mind. I will get to these 2 points during my talk. I'm going to start off with looking at what cyber power actually is. So there are many of definitions around what cyber power actually means. But this is the one that I found the most intriguing because it actually highlights the good point that cyber power is about demonstrating power either in cyberspace or outside of it by the means of cyber. And there's, due to our technology level in the world right now, there's ubiquitous ways to demonstrate cyber power because there's so many ways that you can actually enter to different systems or devices or whatever you want to call it through cyber. And that's actually one very specific thing that we're going to look at right now is that how you can actually use cyber to interfere with UAVs. So the question is, okay, well, UAVs, and I also said I'm going to look at civilian UAVs. You might think, well, if you just have some small UAV that maybe is 150, 200, 300 grams, and someone's just kind of using it for recreational uses, how could that actually somehow relate to cyber power? But the thing is, one, of course, in recreational uses, you may think, okay, it's not that important, but there are really a lot of them around. Now, I don't know the exact numbers for the US, but I know they're like really, really huge. I think they're really selling up in the 100,000s per year. So this is really huge. If you think about 100,000 drones swarming around the airspace, and that's like really, really the minimum. Like it's more, it's way more swarming around the airspace, and probably possibly being out of control. Then you kind of get a feeling why this may actually lead to a demonstration of cyber power. And obviously there are also a lot of other uses around for civilian drones. So you have them being used in firefighting, in border patrol, in packet delivery, in movie making, in journalist activities. They're like huge ways of actually using UAVs nowadays. And so if you think about each of these scenarios has their very own implications, what it would mean if someone were to interfere with those drones and thereby hinder the action that it's supposed to do. So just a quick remark to the technical, I'm not having any clock up here, so. Oh. Good. So having said that, I've made the point why are actually UAVs interesting in a cyber power way. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how can you actually attack UAVs. Now this is a scheme for UAVs that was introduced in 2014 actually at CyCon. So this talk has been up here too. So what we're looking at is how you can actually, from a design point of view or from a hacker point of view, look at how can I attack this thing. So, and with thing, the first thing that people may not always bear in mind is that you don't just think about the drone itself. Now the drone is one way of attacking it, but you can also attack the operator or through the operator or the ground station. Now obviously you can also attack the operator, him or herself, but I'm not thinking of that point. So these are kind of the red arrows are actually showing the ways where you would most prominently think about that you could actually enter into a UAV flying in the air right now at one moment. So what you have at the first point is the basic system. Now the basic system is called the basic system and not an operating system because not all UAVs have operating systems in that sense. They all have some kind of steering circuits, but they don't necessarily all have like software code on them. Some of them are just hard-coded into the hardware. This point is especially interesting if you look at some applications that have been arising lately, where you actually have a project that allows you to use your smartphone and put it onto a hardware device that is able to fly, and then you're actually able to have a drone that's been just operated from your smartphone. Now we all have heard about loads of exploitations based on smartphone operating systems, especially also on Android, of course, and the other ones. I don't want to say anything against Android. But obviously there are loads of exploitations around. So you can imagine if you have like a couple of hundred of these things flying in the air and they are being exploited on this level, what implication this may have. So that's one way of entering that's very interesting. And then of course the communication links, you may interfere with your signals in whatever way. You may manipulate with the sensors that they are getting wrong data, which is obviously gonna influence the flight mode. Now some of the UAVs around do have automatic control systems installed, some don't. There are actually quite a lot of attacks around that are based on putting the UAV into a flight safe mode, which is then leading to a specific behavior, which is then being used to actually get to where the attacker wants. And the other way where you can actually, or the other way that you can get to an UAV is actually through the ground station. And also here, there have actually been attacks around that have been demonstrating this. So there has been a keylogging virus that was installed a couple of years ago. I would be lying. I have to look this. I would recommend to really look this up. There's been a keylogging virus installed on an air navigation base in the US. I'm not exactly sure which one. It's in the paper, which was very interesting because you wouldn't think that you would be able to kind of get a keylogging virus into a ground station. But there are the operators. Some of them may bring their USB stick from home. Stuff like that does happen. These things just do happen. So, having said all that, these are just kind of a series, these are just examples of what you can do. Like, just to give you the impression that there are like loads of attacks that you can actually take and to get into in UAV. So, obviously, one of the questions could be, well, why are there that many? And the simple answer is, which also is one of the points that Vincent made earlier. The same for UAV, you don't have that many of security mechanisms installed. Like from a computer scientist point of view, we have loads of ways of countermeasuring these attacks, but they're just not being installed. And that's one of the points that you should hopefully get from this talk. So, having said that, I've also already been hitting at some of the examples that were actually shown in the past, that you actually believe me that this is not some theoretical stuff I'm saying, but it's actually things that really do happen or that have happened. These are just 4 of the very prominent examples that everyone should be aware of. Most of you will have heard of these. So the first one up is the 2009 video stream interception, which was actually claimed by Iraqi forces. It didn't hit the public that hard, actually, at the time. You would have thought that people would have been more aware of it, but basically, it wasn't kind of striking that much. They said, okay, good. So they caught the video stream, which was unencrypted. Maybe that wasn't the best thing to have an unencrypted video stream for a military operation, but well, okay, that's fixed. So that didn't hit the public. But what really hit the public, and which is also one of the great examples how actually UAVs may demonstrate cyber power or the loss of cyber power, was the loss of the US RQ-170 Sentinel in 2011, which was actually claimed to have been taken down by Iranian forces. Now, this has never been confirmed whether it actually was this case or whether it was an accident, but what it really showed is that through this loss of the RQ-170 Sentinel, people lost their faith in American cyber power superiority. And it's actually one of the most cited UAV incident examples, especially when it comes to why not to use UAVs in a military operation, because it's actually believed that this really shows that you cannot control UAVs and that you may lose them and that they may actually impose a threat through cyber measures. So these are actually the 2 military examples I put up. There are 2 other ones that I have around. The one is a Wi-Fi sniffer, which was introduced by Hack5, it's a group, in 2013, where they actually used AR drones as Wi-Fi sniffers. So normally, as an attacker, you would have the problem, if you want to sniff a Wi-Fi, you have to be somewhere around there. Like, you can't be a couple of kilometers away. But if you have your drone and it has that flying range, then obviously you don't have to be nearby. So that is a huge advantage for the attacker because it makes them harder to locate. And also bear this in mind, right now we don't have any registration policies or trafficking policies or anything around. Like even if you find a drone and you say, hey, this drone is actually sniffing my Wi-Fi, you wouldn't be able to attribute this drone to any operator. And that's really one of the big points and disadvantages. So, and another project that I want to point you at, which is really interesting, is the SkyJack project, which was done by Sami Kamkar. I'm sure most of you people will have heard of him. If not, do Google him. He has loads of interesting security projects up. Now, the SkyJack project is actually a project where Sami was able to use an AR drone and to get this drone to automatically seek, hack, and control other AR drones within its range. And the next really big thing about this is you can actually download this code for free on GitHub. So anyone with an AR drone could actually redo this attack. So just kind of to give you an impression of what is going on right now. So I also promised that I would be looking at some more military or paramilitary activities that have been around. So of course the most prominent one is right now was the Ukrainian conflict, where actually civilian drones have been used to demonstrate cyber power or gain an advantage within the conflict. And it's very interesting because it's actually showing us that it's a living lesson how technology and conflicts may interfere or interchange and change each other. So what happened is actually when the conflict started, the Ukraine was not very well equipped with UAVs. Like most of the ones that they were around were very old, very outdated, were quite easy to take down. And what happened then is that they were actually starting to crowdfund. And this is also very interesting. Yeah, you're crowdfunding your military devices. Yeah, okay, so it's interesting. Yeah. So they were crowdfunding to buy like really modern UAVs, but again, civilian UAVs, not military. And then what the thing is about these civilian UAVs is that they are made for people to modify them. And that's what they live on. One thing is, of course, it's cool to have a flying object around at home and play with it. But the other thing is really that you can do so many things with them. Like you can put cameras on them, you can use them to sniff the Wi-Fi of your neighbor, you can take pictures of your neighbor's wife or whatever. Haven't said that. And obviously within this conflict, what has happened or how they've mainly been used is to get more situational awareness from the Ukrainian part. So obviously it's a huge advantage if you have a drone, if you modify it to have a larger range, and you're therewith able to actually go beyond your enemy's borders and get some live stream from over there. Other things then, of course, Russia has responded to, or the Russian, wouldn't say funded. The other side was, of course, reacting to this. So they were starting to find ways to actually see where there are drones from the other side coming over. So you would start looking at, okay, how can I actually interfere with these drones? How can I hijack the data? How can I disrupt the signals? How can I manipulate data? Because again, I want to take away that advantage that the other side just got by getting like GPS data from my actual positions. So I want to change that. I want to get them wrong information. So if they launch missiles at this location that I just thought they found out, it's going to hit somewhere else. So these are kind of the things that have been happening in the Ukraine, and there are also loads of reports on this. If you're interested in the exact sources, please look it up in the paper. They're all down there. So going on from what has happened to what we could actually do. Now, the current situation, or at least till very recent, the current situation, namely to December 2015, was that for the US, the rules for the operation of UAVs was actually based on a law established in 1946 on a chicken farm. And this is not just putting it in a funny way, but this is actually the truth. So namely, this basically said that within a certain attitude of your property, up in the air, everything is still your property. So you're allowed to shoot it down. Now, what happened then in 2015 is that the FAA actually introduced a series of regulations that at least forced people to register their small civilian UAVs. So at least that is some advantage, because earlier everybody could just go into a toy shop and buy civilian UAVs and do whatever they wanted to do with them. So at least now you have some way of saying, okay, this UAV was once sold to whatever person. Now, of course, if you resell it or if you get it from a board or whatever, that doesn't help. What's good about this is that the US is at least aware, and they are explicitly stating it in their regulations, that there may be a malicious use of civilian UAVs in terms of cyber power. If you look at the UK, it's actually, they may be better at installing technical countermeasures, but they are worse at the awareness point, because there's basically no awareness of the malicious use of UAVs. It's more thinking about the accidental misuse of them. And one common presumption within the UK especially is that a drone is only a large risk if it's big. So of course, if you don't want to get hit by a 1 kilogram drone, obviously, but you don't want to get hit by 10 300-gram drones either. So, and that's just kind of making the point that it's actually really the opposite. It's not the larger drone that's the biggest threat. It's a bunch of small drones that are a big threat. So, again, looking at the technical countermeasures, there are loads of these around. I've said that earlier when I was looking at the attacks that you could actually go against the system. Most of these attacks are just basic computer science attacks. Like these have been around, like man in the middle, DDoS, all that stuff that's been around for ages. We also know that we should encrypt our channels. We know these things, and there are ways to do that, but we just don't do it in terms of civilian UAVs yet. Hopefully, this is one of the things that we want to change. But apart from that, there's actually also a big market on countermeasures that you can take. So obviously, if you find a drone flying over your property, how to take it down, where you can shoot at it, but it's not ideal for various reasons. So instead, you can use laser weapons. There are actually things, you can actually buy these things, yes. There's also a net deploying UAV, which is actually going after other UAVs to catch them with a net, which is interesting. Radar detection, electro-optical infrared tracking, so that you actually know where it's going. One of the big things that you actually really want to know if you find a UAV doing something malicious is actually where it's coming from and who's operating it. So of course you want to identify the UAV. That's nice. So the first thing is you should have some kind of identification on this thing. And the second one is if you get this idea, you actually want to know who is operating it, because just because the drone is registered on someone doesn't mean that he is actually operating it right now. If you just think about what I said earlier about hijacking UAVs, for example, to the Skyjack project. So from a technical point of view, what you could do to kind of heighten attribution levels is to actually install ID chips. And with ID chips, I really mean ID chips in technical terms. Now, what the US is doing is they're putting a tag on the UAVs, which is nice to have, but it's not very helpful from a technical point of view. Also because you want to be able to really ask the UAV from a protocol point of view to what is your name, who is operating you, and you want to get an answer, and you don't want to have some ID tag on the back of it, which you also could manipulate. So the other thing is, of course, you need a compulsory registration, which is something that the FAA has introduced in 2015, so this is very good. The UK is actually working on a UAV traffic system, There's some details on this in the paper. There are quite some drawbacks with this way of installing the traffic system because what they've been asking the people to do is to actually register every time they are doing a flight, which route are they going to take and for how long and things like that. I mean, that's great if you have this information, but first of all, it's an online system, so this is going to be attackable. The other thing is, how likely is this going to happen? If you're thinking of recreational users, everyone who's ever tried to fly a drone will know that it's very hard to navigate. So even if you really want to be with this system and you really want to be good and report everything, you might just end up flying a completely different route out of accident. So these are kind of some of the drawbacks of the system. There are more details on this in the paper. So, and with this, I'm closing, and I'm going to give you a brief outlook of what I believe what is going to happen, or what could happen. So one of the things that are obviously going to come up, or that have already been there, now just recall what I said on the Ukrainian conflict, is actually UAV on UAV warfare. So this is one of the things that we need to be aware of. And I'm not just talking about UAV on UAV warfare in military senses, but I'm actually talking about civilian UAVs that are being used in, yes, a military context, and that are being used against each other. So this is actually one of the things that you really need to look at. The other one is UAV swarms, which has also already been seen in the Ukrainian conflict. Again, also there is more information on this in the paper. Then, of course, there are other uses around, going away from the Ukrainian conflict. You could, of course, think of UAVs, especially civilian UAVs, that are being used for terrorist purposes. So if you just think about really 20, 30, 40 UAVs flying into some object, that is, of course, a threat, not just to cyber, but to identical to individual health. And the other thing is, of course, that there could also be attacks operated from UAVs. Now, if you recall the Wi-Fi sniffer example, that has shown us that you can actually use UAVs to sniff other channels. Now, if you can sniff, you can also insert information. And again, due to the fact that attribution is even harder with UAVs, it's already hard in any cyber incident that happens, but it's especially hard if it's happening through UAVs. You can imagine that you're actually able to operate from a long distance, get in front of whatever object you want to attack and attack it through this UAV, through cyber measures, which is very cool from a scientific point of view, but is obviously a huge threat for our security. So I hope that I got the two messages to you. So the one is, it's not the size of the drone, and actually civilian UAVs may impose a threat to cyber power. And the other one is that we really need to get our policy makings and our legislation to actually catch up with the current reality of UAV usage. So with that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kim. We have some time for questions, if somebody is interested. 1, 2, 3. No questions. So, okay, sir.
You pointed out the difficulty of attribution. Patton
okay.
Adams with VeriSign iDefense. You pointed out the difficulty of attribution under current conditions where some of the means that you listed may not be available. Have you explored possible ways, like triangulation of signals or things like that, to find at least the presence of the owner or the operator of the UAV and maybe point towards attribution under current standards or current conditions?
That's a good point. So what I was making as a point is that right now you do have difficulties with the attribution. Now, it's not impossible. As you, for example, said, the triangulation method is one of the ways that you can actually reallocate the operator. However, there again in the Ukrainian conflict, there have been countermeasures to this by just installing a larger set of antennas that are sending the same signal so that you can mess up your triangulation. Now, if you're not looking at the Ukrainian conflict, but rather in general on civilian uses, you would be able to to use the triangulation method, and if you were then also able to correctly identify the UAV, then that would of course be one way of allowing the attribution. But again, these are things that have to be installed, and there also have to be people that are actually responsible or that feel responsible for doing this. So right now, what would you do if you feel that there's a drone flying around your property and you don't want it? Okay, maybe you would call the police, but what would the police do? That's the point. Like there are no roadmaps available. There's no scheme saying, okay, if this happens, then you do these are the next step to take. And I would also doubt that there are enough qualified experts around to actually do a triangulation. So that answers your question.
Yeah. Something else? Yes, sir.
Hi, Richard Gold, Digital Shadows. I think this is really interesting stuff. Also, one thing that occurred to me, there was a self-assembly drone, the WASP UAV that the guys built for similar kind of things you described. Do you think that the ease of self-assembly equipment in this area is an issue?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm getting the question correctly. So you're...
Some people built their own drone.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that it's an issue when it's actually pretty easy for a couple of guys in a garage to build something which has the kind of capabilities that you're talking about, sniffing Wi-Fi, you know, it was pulling the passwords, sending them back to the back-end server?
Yes, of course. So basically, if I'm rephrasing your question, you're asking whether it does impose, or in my opinion, it does impose a threat if people are able to build their drones by themselves. So right now, even if you were to install all these technical countermeasures on UAVs that you can buy in stores, whether that would still be a threat then. So yes.
Yeah, and how much of a threat, I think, is what I'm interested in, your opinion.
Well, how much really depends on the background of the people doing it. So obviously, if you have a country where the technical knowledge of the average person is quite high, then the threat in that country for this to happen is larger than in a country where you wouldn't have many people around with a technical background. So that is really a very specific question that you would have to answer for each country. Specifically, there's actually, we wrote an article on different levels of cybersecurity awareness within Europe, which has been published also by myself and Kiergals through the US Army War College. Just came out in 2015, which is actually looking at this very specific aspect, how the technical competence of the people within a country may impose or not impose security threats.
Great. So, thank you, Kim. That was all. Okay. I hope I won't. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Click and grow.
Thanks.
Okay. So, for those that didn't believe here, so we have the gentleman here from Raytheon. So, Jeff and Scott will say how this can be happen. They promised that they will bring the UAV here, and the director was asking if this could bring him a drink, but nevertheless, so...
Safety concerns, they didn't want us to fly the drone in the
Okay, the floor is yours.
Space.
Thank you.
So again, thanks for the opportunity to present this afternoon, and I think the two previous presentations are a great segue to what Scott and I are going to talk to you about. And that really is, when you look at unmanned systems, and I want to say more than just UAVs, but unmanned systems, there are inherent vulnerabilities in those systems, and there are, because of those vulnerabilities, there are various things that you could do to those systems. And then you start talking about the Internet of Things. So, we've seen the explosion of drones. As we start to see more and more applications and devices being connected, that increases the threat vector to all of these connected devices exponentially. So you have 4 billion people, 25 plus million apps that grows every day, 25 embedded objects and intelligence systems, and 50 trillion gigabytes of data that's generated that probably increases twofold every 6 months. We talk about threats, so we have seen in the news some threats to aviation. Recently there was one in Great Britain at Heathrow Airport. A pilot reported a drone in close proximity. Kim talked about Even in the backyard, if a drone is out there and it could fall on your property and do damage. But what happens if a bad actor is using a drone and it's got chemical weapons on it, or they're using it to ID friendly forces to conduct some kind of terrorist attack? So there are real threats associated with these unmanned systems. And again, it's not just airborne, but it's also could be on the water, it could be on the road, as we're seeing cars now being operated autonomously. And one of the ways when Scott gets up and talks to you about what we did in this particular scenario is the first process or first point that you go through is identifying where that vulnerability is so you can develop a countermeasure to apply against it. And we do that with something we call scientific red teams, where we look at the architecture, the hardware, the software, the RF pieces, all the different facets and components that make up an unmanned system. We look at those and determine where a vulnerability is. And so not only from a vulnerability perspective do you understand how you can take control of an unmanned system, but the reverse result of that is you also know how you could potentially harden the systems that you're developing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Okay. It's really loud. Okay, scientific red team, basically, like you were saying, we look at the whole system. So we want to step back and take a look at everything that makes up the system. I know previous talks had been talking about, different aspects, the base system, the communication, the telecommunication, any part of the system that makes that system unique is also potentially a threat. So when we do a scientific red team, we are looking at all the protocols. We want to look at the board. We want to look at the firmware. We want to look at anything. I know she had talked about code sneaking into a ground station, keylogger. That sort of stuff, honestly, it happens. It happens on a lot of systems. So when we look at things, we want to make sure that we don't skip over the obvious things. And we do this when we do our own code. We do this when we look at our own systems, and we do this when we look at our customer systems. Since this topic, we took it's a commercial drone. It's 3DR. The board that's up there is a Pixhawk. It's RG Pilot Mega. It's an ARM processor. So basically you have a flying computer. Now, the interesting part about that has full GPS, has the ability to add on other boards. So it makes a very, interesting platform from a hobbyist. You can put good cameras on there. And if you look on the right, there's a whole mission planning stuff. So what does that mission planning give you? Well, I can plot waypoints. So I can work the camera. So if I'm a cameraman and I want to actually deploy this out there, I don't have to hire a helicopter with a camera crew. I can just focus on taking my video. That's great. It's very useful. None of the stuff's hardened. On the bottom is a telemetry radio. Now, in Europe, it functions on 433, US 915, just different laws. Now, that's wonderful stuff. It gives you all the ins and outs of what the vehicle's actually doing. It gives you the speed, all the GPS information, the battery life, because all these things are flying. They're flying with a nice LiPo battery. I don't know if any of you have seen what happens to a LiPo battery when it becomes unstable. Basically bursts into flames. It's another reason you got to kind of make sure that these things are taken care of properly. I know there's a lot of policies about taking how much lithium you can bring on an aircraft. Well, the reason being is these things are basically just incendiary devices. So you could see how flying one of these over a military base or even a restricted space, like near an airport. We have problems in the US, people trying to fly these stupid things onto the White House lawn. Now, shooting them down, great. You're in a city. That's not really a good answer. Giant nets. I've seen a couple videos. I think in Japan, they're actually fighting UAVs with other nets. So they go back and they swarm, and they go back and forth. It's kind of humorous. I've also seen the ones where they have birds of prey. They have raptors coming down and grabbing one. It's neat. How many guys are going to be walking around with birds on their arm? So I'm going to go on to why we looked at this. So like I said, we took a whole system, all of it's open source. So the firmware, the ground control, the protocol. So MAVLink, it is micro aerial vehicle link. It is meant to be flexible. It's not encrypted. It's very easy to read. It's very simple. The telemetry radios, the firmware that's on there, it's easy to compile. You can get a VM, you can get it up and running no time. So if you're highly technical, you can modify these. The other potential attack vectors we looked at was the camera feeds. I know she had talked a little bit about that on some military ones. But most of these are running at like 5.8. You know, they're pretty easy to pick up. So if you had a decent software-defined radio, you can start picking up if anyone's flying a drone in your area. Wi-Fi, of course. GPS, I think we've already discussed a little bit of what GPS and the damage if you're jamming or sending missed signals to it. But we want to make sure that we looked at the entire platform. Now, that being said, since we had the board, we had all the source code, we ran it through some analysis. And static code analysis on the board, great. We used a tool, we used Fortify. I mean, we didn't build our own. The first one, it gave us everything. We did not have to go any further. There's no need to, you know, as doing vulnerability research, there's no need to step further once you have everything. I had full control over the entire board. I could tell it to just shut down. I could say reboot. That's a great thing if something is in flight. You know, reboot the board is controlling the entire system. Tell it to reboot while it's in flight. It drops. So, you know, we kind of step back, and as a company, we'd like to look at our own systems and say, do we have these sorts of vulnerabilities? Now, UAVs, you know, since they're consumer grade, the prosumer ones have nicer cameras. Everyone's seen these things flying over sporting events, crashing into sporting events, and being kind of a nuisance. So, to test our attack, so yes, we did build a little attack. It's not hard. We actually simulated the entire board. Now, that's a great opportunity because I can test it. I can do it over and over, and I don't have to worry about, you know, spinning blades coming and crashing and safety risk. That's another reason Nico didn't have me, you know, bring these things here. The one we're using has 8 blades. You know, the blades are, I think we're using 11-inch props. So it's loud, and it would hurt if it hit you. So the simulation itself, the simulation is great because I can step through it. I can run the attack several times. I can see which facet of it I want to turn. It also gives an opportunity. So if we went back and we patched the code itself, we could see what the effect was. We could also make a swarm. So we do several of these simulations, and we can see if our attack on this vulnerability actually functions against a swarm. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking at the system as a whole, but particularly in this domain, there's a lot of questions, not a lot of answers. They are so flexible. They're so useful, and people are scared of them because they're able to get to places. They're cheap and easy to get into places they shouldn't be. People are already misusing them. Governments are misusing them. You know, consumers, the hobbyists, you know, they love them, but unfortunately, you know, it didn't take long for people to figure out, I can use this to get into somewhere. I can put, you know, listening devices. I can put, you know, bombs, you know, chemical agents, whatever. The simple fact that I can get in and get video feeds on a location that I'm not allowed to get to is a threat enough. So since the entire system we started off with, we're simulating. Raytheon procurement takes a little time on buying things. So we simulated the entire system before we even had any of the hardware. That's great. Well, how do you know it had an effect? I had to write a little plug-in for Matt. It's an easy thing to do. If you look up, I believe, right in the middle of the chart, it says the RC channel. That's MAVLink. It's not encrypted. It's very easy to read, and it tells you, you know, what I'm actually doing. What's my effect on the UAV itself? Now, it's very simple code, what I'm doing is I'm telling the board, which controls everything, to ignore the operator and to follow my commands. And I was able to successfully create the attack before even having any hardware, just through simulation itself. All right, I'm going to start off with the first attack. Now, it's a denial of service, but it's not really the typical. I'm not sending commands over and over and over. I'm sending one command. And it's over RF. I'm using that telemetry radio because the telemetry radio is, well, frankly, it's open for anyone who can communicate with it. It does not differentiate between me, the valid operator, or, Jeff's the attacker. It doesn't care. It just runs. Can you play the... Simply said, what we did was when we launched the attack, and it will not respond to the operator until we reset it, because the board is now locked out. So the operator is, like I said, you could retask it, but at the same time, this thing's going to just fall down. Now that's great. That's good way to deny something coming in. But what if it has, something simple like a hand grenade on it? Do you want that falling? Or, talked before about you want to retask a UAV to do something else, or, pretty much steal your neighbors and have it go do it so that you don't have the attribution. So that's where the second one comes in. The second attack is actually us getting positive control of the system. And we did hula, which basically just means it spins around. We're doing this in our chamber, and as you can see, the thing's bolted down so that it doesn't fly out and destroy our lovely chamber. You play a second one? Good. You notice the throttle's down? So that's going over the board itself. Remember, the board is the brains. It's a flying computer. It's a blessing and a curse. There's nothing hardened about this system. Everything's open. It kind of leads us, kind of the infancy of where this technology really is. It was meant to be open. The hobbyists, they want to use it. They want to go fly it. It's a nice, bright, sunny day. Go to the park, fly it. Take pictures of the ocean, whatever they'd like to do. This is a huge opportunity, but it can be also a good threat.
And I think one of the important things there is that this wasn't jamming, this wasn't taking an EW effect and throwing it against the vehicle. This was using, identifying and using a cyber vulnerability to actually take control of the vehicle and make it do what you want. So that's important if you're talking about, like Scott mentioned, if it's over a crowded area and you just used EW to take the drone down, there would probably be some type of injury associated with that. But if you can take control of the drone and safely make it do what you want to do and take it to a unpopulated area and bring it down, that's much more advantageous from a counter UAS perspective.
So we're gonna end with a little bit of kind of the opportunities when you look at hardening the system. I know some of that's been talked about before. Now, for us, we found one vulnerability in the code that gave us everything. But if you step back, we're getting in over the telemetry radio. What's the easiest way? Communications. It's not encrypted. Well, we tested it. We did a little whitelist test. Worked great. That pair, it functions only with its mate. That's great. You can encrypt it. Encryption brings its own questions, its own problems. You have key management and a lot of other things. But the advantage of doing that is the rest of the system, that initial attack that we were looking at, it no longer had an effect. We didn't have to go back and retest everything. Now, if we're talking about other systems that have to be certified, other things that fly, whenever you fix something, you do a vulnerability patch, you got to go back and recertify that every system functions the way it needs to. Otherwise, it could introduce new vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's a great point Scott made. You know, when we do vulnerability research to look for ways to do counter drone or counter UAS or any unmanned vehicle or system, it also provides a back end to where we look at how we can build in some cyber resiliency to these systems to make sure at the end of the day that that system that's being deployed for whatever purpose is having its intended function. So cyber hardening or cyber resiliency is very important because really at the end of the day, when you build a system, build a platform, build a technology, it has to be able to operate in a highly contested cyber denied environment. And really that's what the hardening piece is here. So while we did this to demonstrate that we could take control of a UAS, I think as equally as important message is that we need to provide cyber resiliency to all of those systems that are being built and used by both government, commercial, and military. That's it.
Okay, you are on time. Okay, so we have a lot of time for questions if somebody wants to ask something. Yes, I see some.
Any of the hard questions Scott has to answer.
Sure.
Hello, I'm Mehizaka from Clarified Security. I do build and fly these things for hobby. You're specifically picking on a very open and community-driven platform. How did you do any research on, for example, Chinese DJI, which is pumping out those drones by hundreds of thousands, and is actually majority of drones out there? What are your thoughts on the manufacturer, like awareness and responsibility? DJI is doing quite a few things after a White House incident with a DJI Phantom, but did you compare your research with more closed systems like DJI?
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
Now,
and comparisons?
there's actually a lot. So yes, DJI, I mean, it owns the market. A lot of it's because of the ability to use cameras. In the US, because we have to register the drones, the FAA has a list. And by far, that's the one manufacturer that has the top of the list, the most registered drones. They use it for real estate, you know, go take a picture of property, fly around a house. It's great. Now, that being said, the flight board it uses, DJI manufactures. It still has communications back and forth. And I think someone had mentioned earlier about there's apps for your phone or, you know, your Android device. Well, that's great. Well, DJI hard-coded some things in there. You know, some passwords and things it shouldn't have. So every one of these things is built to be open enough to function. They don't want your average home user to have to, you know, recompile code every single time they want to fly one of these. So they all have their own open and accessible vulnerabilities. It's just right now everyone's starting to pay attention to them. Now, as far as what they're doing, as far, you know, to guide people not to do the bad things, kind of like a lock on the door. You know, it's going to keep the honest people honest. Geofencing, you know, that'll keep you away from airports. It'll keep you away from the White House, military bases. You know, things they really shouldn't be near. Well, a savvy user can turn those off. Hope that answered.
Yes, we have this gentleman here.
Thomas Ridd from King's College. Question on the RQ-170. I don't know if I may, since it's built by a competitor, I thought, why not ask? The unconfirmed story of how the Iranians could have captured the drone was by allegedly spoofing GPS signals that told the drone to come down at its home base, which in fact in Afghanistan, which in fact was then spoofed to be in Iran at approximately the same altitude. The spot was chosen for that reason, I hear. So how credible do you think is that story?
We don't have any knowledge of that from a government or from a competitor's perspective, so we wouldn't be able to comment.
Good answer. Somebody else? Well, I can understand also, I have a question. I can understand the cost. So this encryption, this would be, do you know if there are models of encryption on these channels? And how this computation overhead be on them? I mean, why they're not using this encryption on the tunnel, because you're jamming the communication.
Well, there's the easy answer is first they wanted to be open and simple. The original telemetry boards were pretty rudimentary pieces. We have a couple in the lab that you can turn on AES immediately, and they also increase the range. So the standard off-the-shelf telemetry boards that these vehicles have, it's about a mile, mile and a half, depends on line of sight. We have one that are dipole antennas that about 25 kilometers, and you can turn on encryption. So the encryption is actually pushed to the board itself, and it's not actually the flight computer. Flight computer has enough things to worry about when it's, you know, in the air. It has to control every prop, it has to control the speed of each one, and make sure that, you know, because other than the flight controls, its primary purpose is pretty much making sure that, you know, it has enough battery. So there's enough things going on with that flight computer that it can't process the encryption, like you said. So they pushed it out to the telemetry, and it seems to work. I'm sure there's going to be some researcher somewhere getting a side channel attack on that as well. But the firmware is there, so someone could reverse engineer it as well.
Okay, thank you. Do you think also, that was a question for Kim, but do you think this kind of regulation could stimulate the innovation? Will stop people? I mean, we are in this level now on UAVs because it's open. But if you start in regulating, or hardening, do you think that this will be an obstacle in innovation?
I don't think so. I think it's value added. I think it makes it so that you can reliably fly something and know that it's yours and you have full control.
Okay, thank you. Some other questions? Well,
Right here?
there's a Chinese proverb that
Nico,
says...
we had one more question.
Oh, thanks. Okay. We'll have time.
Before your proverb.
Hi, Ivan Martinovic from Oxford University. I was working with Vincent on the aviation security. So my question here is, I mean, you know, we work, and whenever we talk about security, we have to set up a threat model. So one thing is to have, you know, unintentional faults or, you know, regulations that will help, you know, hobbyists or people without, you know, malicious behavior to follow the policies and the mechanisms. But another thing is to have intentional malicious behavior. And, you know, these things are very simple devices. And as you said, you can reverse engineer them, and, you know, no regulation or geo-fencing will help you prevent basically security attacks, right? Or the attacks which are using drones for that. What is your view on that? Is there, you know, what is the approach then?
So
I don't think that policy will help it.
What I would say is that for any system, whether it be an aircraft, a ship, a submarine, an unmanned UAV, you have to do threat analysis against that system. And where you apply your mitigation is based on the threat that that asset is going to have against its intended function. So for these systems like that, if there are ones where we know that they are going to be operated in areas that could cause harm to the general public or to government or military, I think you have to take those threats into consideration, you prioritize them, and then you decide how you're going to go mitigate against the threat that that provides. So it's threat reduction just like it is for any other system.
No one else. Okay, thank you, Jeff and Scott, for this presentation. I hope you liked the session. Just to remind you that we have the app, so please give us feedback. And also we have a survey. Enjoy your coffee, and we'll see you probably, if you are more interested in tech, to room 1, that we have this protection weapon system. Thank you again for your attention.